The risk that didn't look brave. When we think of courage, we imagine bold moves and dramatic leaps. But some of the riskiest decisions never look brave at all. They appear quiet, sensible, even cautious. This story begins with one of those choices, 97A risk so understated that most people didn't recognize it as courage until much later. At the time, everything about their career looked stable. The path was defined. The expectations were reasonable. Progress followed a predictable rhythm. And in a world that rewards visible confidence, there was no obvious reason to disrupt what was working. That's why this story matters today. 97, because the most important risks often don't announce themselves as such. They arrive without fanfare, dressed in uncertainty, and the people who recognize them are rarely celebrated in the moment. The opportunity arrives subtly. No pressure, no urgency, just an option presented in passing. It didn't promise advancement or recognition. In fact, it offered less certainty than what they already had. From the outside, it looked like a lateral move at best. At worst, a distraction. Their initial reaction was dismissal. Why risk momentum for something undefined? Why trade clarity for uncertainty? The choice didn't match the traditional image of ambition. It didn't come with applause or reassurance. And that made it easy to overlook. But something about it lingered. It wasn't the role itself. It was a feeling it sparked. A sense of curiosity they hadn't felt in years. A pull toward learning rather than performing. The possibility of growth without visibility. The risk wasn't dramatic. 97, it was personal. It required trusting an internal signal over external validation. The kind of trust that feels uncertain in the moment, but often proves to be the most reliable guide a person has. They didn't feel brave considering it. They felt uneasy. And that unease, they would soon realize, was the first sign that the risk mattered more than it appeared. The unease followed them quietly. It surfaced during moments of reflection, when noise faded and instinct had room to speak. The option they had dismissed kept returning, 97 not as excitement, but as a question. Why does this matter to me? The more they tried to ignore it, the clearer it became that the discomfort wasn't fear of failure. It was fear of stepping outside a narrative that had always kept them safe. They began to examine why the choice felt so wrong on the surface. It didn't raise their status. It didn't strengthen their resume in obvious ways. It didn't offer proof of progress others could easily understand. In fact, accepting would require explaining a decision that sounded underwhelming, even regressive. That realization revealed the real tension, 97 not the risk itself, but how it would be perceived. The conflict deepened as they compared the two paths. One was familiar, predictable, and widely approved. The other was unclear, quiet, and carried no promise of recognition. It asked for patience and humility in quantities that felt almost unreasonable given the culture of constant advancement surrounding them. Choosing the second meant letting go of reassurance, letting go of being easily understood. And that loss felt heavier than the uncertainty of the work itself. They noticed how strongly they had been conditioned to equate bravery with visibility. Big moves, loud changes, clear ambition. This choice offered none of that. It asked for patience, for humility, for trust in something that couldn't be defended with logic alone. And that made it uncomfortable in a way they hadn't experienced before. The tension peaked when they imagined declining the opportunity entirely. Life would continue smoothly. The path ahead would remain intact. Nothing would be disrupted, yet the thought brought an unexpected heaviness. Not relief, not closure, just the sense of having turned away from something meaningful. That realization landed with force. The risk didn't look brave because it wasn't about appearance. It was about alignment, about choosing growth that happens quietly, away from approval and applause. And once they understood that, the choice could no longer be dismissed as insignificant. It was asking something real of them. The moment of decision arrived without ceremony. No surge of confidence. No clear assurance that everything would work out. Just a calm recognition that avoiding the risk would be its own kind of choice, 97, and one they would feel far longer than the uncertainty ahead. The internal conflict peaked there. Accepting the risk meant stepping into something that offered no immediate reward, no visible upgrade, no applause, It meant starting again in certain ways, asking questions instead of giving answers, learning instead of performing. The ego resisted strongly. It warned them of wasted time, lost momentum, diminished status. But beneath that resistance was clarity. The path they were already on had become predictable, comfortable, manageable, and while it wasn't wrong, it no longer stretched them. This quiet risk, by contrast, demanded presence. It required engagement. It asked them to grow in ways that wouldn't be measured quickly, 97, or easily. Fear didn't disappear. It sharpened. They worried about explaining the decision later, about justifying the lack of visible progress, about whether patience would eventually pay off. Yet for the first time in a long while, the fear felt clean, honest. It wasn't rooted in insecurity, 97. It was rooted in responsibility. The emotional peak came when they imagined looking back years later. Two versions of the future appeared. One was safe, coherent, and easy to describe. The other was uncertain, uneven, but alive with learning. The question was no longer which path made sense. It was which regret they could live with. In that clarity, the quiet risk revealed its true nature. It wasn't small. It was foundational. It would shape how they learned, how they worked, and how they measured success from that point forward. They chose it not because it looked brave, but because it felt true. The aftermath of the decision didn't bring immediate confirmation, no sudden breakthrough, no external validation. In fact, for a time, it looked like nothing had changed at all. But internally, the shift was profound. The quiet risk had altered how they approached everything. They found themselves more engaged, more attentive, more willing to sit with uncertainty. The work required humility, patience, and sustained effort. Progress came slowly, but it came honestly. Each small improvement felt earned. Each challenge felt instructive. The absence of applause made the learning deeper. Over time, the effects began to compound. Skills sharpened in unexpected ways. Confidence grew, 97 not from recognition, but from competence. They became comfortable operating without constant reassurance, trusting their judgment even when the path remained unclear. The quiet risk had fundamentally changed their relationship with uncertainty, transforming it from something to avoid into something to navigate. The quiet risk had taught them how to move forward without needing to be seen. Looking back, they understood why the decision hadn't looked brave. Courage is often mistaken for spectacle. But real courage is choosing growth without guarantees, choosing alignment without approval, choosing the long view when short-term validation is available. The risk that didn't look brave became the foundation of a more resilient career, one built on learning rather than image, on substance rather than signal, on depth rather than display. And that foundation held stronger than any visible leap ever could. It proved that the decisions which shape a career most profoundly are often the ones that require the most patience and the least applause. Sometimes the bravest decision is the one no one applauds. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.